Now, another thing that we've got to talk about here is this whole thing cost $450 million. And I've heard this referred to as a right-wing talking point. Well, let me quote the right-wing news agency, the ABC, who today said that the AEC estimated the cost of the referendum about $450 million. Oh, so the AEC says it's about $450 million. $450 million. Well, of course, this is an extraordinary amount of money that has been wasted on a Prime Minister trying to bully his way through to the history books. Now, he'll dress it up in tears and the red dirt of the Northern Territory. Well, you know what this was all about. Now, he had plenty of times to split the question, to change the question, to change the wording, to delay the vote. But no, he thought he had it sewn up because he was told by everyone in Marrickville, he was told by everyone in Barton, he was told by everyone in the ACT, good on your elbow, you keep going, mate. Every time he walked into a interview and the questions were about the No campaign, he thought he nailed it when he didn't answer the actual questions. And every time he got a soft one on the ABC, well, again, that's just playing a home game, isn't it? Well, the Prime Minister, again, was asked a very direct question about this huge amount of money. Now, I do love the number of people who say, oh, let's just step past it. $450 million, $500 million.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government has spent $450 million on a failed referendum, while the Yiparinya School in Alice Springs has been asking for just $12 million to provide accommodation for at-risk Indigenous children to help close the gap. Will the Prime Minister commit to this funding?
Seriously? Honestly? Now, again, $450 million, and this was all about practical help in changing the thing. He made a choice. The polls told him for months. He could have put it off. He could have delayed it. He could have split the question so at least one half of it would have got up. But no, he wanted the history books. Well, this was the Prime Minister not answering a very direct question about an example of priorities, not to fund the schools, but to fund the vote that made the Teals, the Greens and the CEOs happy.
I thank the Leader of the National Party for his question. And I do note from the Leader of the Opposition that he's spoken about it being a waste to have a referendum. And there's a reason why the National Party perhaps have asked that rather than the Liberal Party, because the Leader of the Opposition committed during the recent referendum to hold another one. To hold another one. That's what he said. He stood up on multiple occasions, on the 11th of August, on the 3rd of September, on the 18th of September, and said his plan, put out there for all to see, was he wanted people to vote no in this referendum,
Member for Page.
then to have an election in which he was successful, and then to vote yes in another referendum.
OK, so it's all about Peter Dutton. Remember, I told you this would be one of their big strategies to change the subject, make it all about Peter Dutton. A long analysis of the vote, why it happened, all the rest of it's up on YouTube. It's up on our socials as well, but there's a little more in all of this. $450 million was spent on an idea that, now defeated, of course, results in nothing. $450 million could well have been spent, the exact same $450 million, on an awful lot of things that would have changed practical results all over the country. But of course that doesn't help you when you're playing for the history books. That doesn't help when you're looking for the biography. It doesn't help for your Wikipedia entry. And how do we know that $450 million could be spent better than on what just happened? Well, let's just go to the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Linda Burney, who's of course been very quiet, despite the fact that she stood there and said that everyone was full of misinformation and Trumpian and all the rest of it. Now, when the budget came out earlier this year, they were trumpeting some of the things that they were spending money on to invest in a better future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, I want you to look at this first one here. They are going to spend $424 million on a whole-of-government investment into strategic priorities for closing the gap in the next 12 to 18 months. That could have been $900 million, but they needed $450 million so they could all have a big gold star on their jacket, so they could all end up with Chairman's Club forever and OAMs because they changed the country. Instead, $450 million spent on a referendum that every poll since June told us was going to fail. The date was not set in June. There was an opportunity to split the question, but of course they didn't. Now, think $450 million of what has just been spent, and these are some of the things that money will get you in actually helping Indigenous communities. Again, this is from their own announcement. They spent $450 million on a referendum. They're spending $141 million on tackling Indigenous smoking. They're spending $238 million on improving First Nations cancer outcomes. They spent $450 million on a referendum. They could have doubled all of those things. $28 million for 30 dialysis units, $38 million for high-quality, culturally appropriate education. What about $20 million over 2 years to arrest the decline of the Aboriginal Hostels Limited? They could have doubled it. They could have spent 10 times. I don't know, but Albo needed his place in history. $11 million for food security. They could have spent how many more than that? Instead, no, $450 million, so they all feel good about themselves when they go to the next Labor Party conference. Fair dinkum. But perhaps the biggest spit in the eye of the priorities of this government is, remember when Anthony Albanese flew in and flew out in January of this year to Alice Springs, when the polls were still saying that the Voice was popular. But the priorities were clear. Remember, he flew in, flew out, spent more time flying to than actually in Alice Springs when it was in the middle of its problems earlier in the year. And then a couple of weeks later, they turned around and announced $48 million over the next 2 years, so really what, the best part of $20-something million a year to help tackle crime in Alice Springs. Literally. They spent 10 times more money on a referendum they knew was failing than being able to do something to help the people of Alice Springs. It's called priorities, and while he's going to turn around and pretend that it was all about the promises that I made, and a promise made is a promise kept, the reality is that he was playing for a spot in the history books. People knew it because, as our friend Stephen Conroy quite correctly points out, was Australia racist when it was for it 60%, or is it now racist because they voted against it 60%? When it was just the vibe, people were into it. Once they worked out the detail, well, of course, they turned around and they voted against it. Shame on these people, truly shame on them. And this government, which still had a surplus, an extra surplus of $20 billion, it found $450 million down the back of the couch for the referendum. It continued to spend the money when they knew that it was going to fail. Yet, that long list, put it up on the screen again, from just one budget is the money that could have all been doubled, 10 times, 5 times, 20 times to get better results. But alas, the arrogance of Albo. But it's everyone else's fault.